like abortion, systematic racism, and then like freedom of speech. That sound good?
Yeah, that sounds great. All right.
All right, perfect.
Hold on. We're not live yet. Let me
Okay.
put it live. Okay. Let's see. All right, we're live.
All right, sounds good.
All right. Do you want to make an opening statement or?
All right, sure. I guess we could start off with systematic racism. So I'll kind of give like my, or actually, do you wanna start with systematic racism? Is that good?
Yeah, it doesn't matter to me.
All right, sounds good. All right, so for systematic racism, my definition of it, it would be systems in place as of now that disproportionately affect African Americans, either intentionally or non intentionally. But if it was non intentionally, the non intentional part would be from past things such as like Jim Crow or slavery. So, like, if we look at Jim Crow, how it made African Americans, more poor, they couldn't get as many education opportunities, and that made them more poor. And then policing, police just automatically affect poorer areas, then that would be an example of systematic racism just because the systems in place a while ago affected it so that the systems in place today could affect those minority communities. So that would be an example. Also, another thing, sentencing disparity, I would say that would be an example of how systematic racism is, today. And then also maybe something else, and maybe like not as, like there was a study done by Harvard, how they found that minority names couldn't get as many callbacks as white, and so I think that would be an example of how implicit bias would affect certain feelings or certain actions done by people in systematic place. So like the owner of the company, things, or not the owner, but like the manager, whoever accepts the jobs, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I noticed you said in towards like the middle, you said that you thought police target lower income communities.
Yeah.
I would disagree with that. I just think, well, I don't even think it's statistically proven that lower income communities, there's more crime committed in those communities. So they don't just hand pick a lower end community to harass. They've done something wrong. So
Um.
I would debunk that
Well,
by
like
saying that.
Well, I think it's like I think like especially like with hot spotting, like there was a study done by I think it was MSU, and it showed that a lot of like implicit bias in the police force has like a lot of effect on African American communities, especially a lot of it has to do with like single motherhood rate, which was caused by it can be caused, well, it was caused by a lot of things. It was caused first of all by welfare de-incentivizing two-parent homes. However, the problem with that argument would be if we saw, well, would you agree that welfare de-incentivized two-parent homes?
Uh, Say that again.
Okay, well, I can explain it to you. So basically, what happened was, so I think, yeah, Lyndon B. Johnson implemented the welfare state. Basically, what this was when it incentivized mothers to, become single parents. And so if this would be, actually, I don't really want to straw man you because I think, do you know a lot about the welfare state and how it affected the African American community?
Not really. I don't. I don't have no.
Well, basically, it was a racist policy implemented by Lyndon B. Johnson to kind of incentivize African Americans to stay single. A lot of studies have shown that single motherhood rates have been a sole predictor in crime and poverty. And so I think that would also be another example of systemic racism and how a racist policy, also like the war on drugs, that would be also like another systemic racist policy, things like that.
Well, I'm not denying in like the 1960s, anything beyond 1960s. I'm never going to try and argue with you and say that
Yeah,
we weren't systemically racist. I'm never going to try and argue with that.
yeah.
My whole argument is in the year 2020. I don't see any racist policies. In fact, I do see one racist policy, but it would not go with your narrative. Are you familiar with affirmative action?
Yeah, for affirmative action for me, I think is kind of needed just because. Well, actually, here's the thing. I have some changes to affirmative action I would make. Specifically,
What are your thoughts on it right now?
as of now, I don't really like it just because it's based on the whole IQ thing. Automatically asserting that Asians have a higher IQ and African Americans a lower IQ. But the part of
Yeah.
it I do agree with. Oh, the whole basis of IQ was created by is usually pushed by either white supremacists or Asian supremacists to kind of prove their race is better. So that's the part that I disagree with. But the part I agree with is how they're trying to help African Americans, trying to help people in lower socioeconomic standings. And I guess another example would be, so like, this isn't really systemic, but it's like, for instance, if you go to the store, right, and you're looking for Band-Aids, and you have a higher chance to find a Band-Aid that's like your color, or like milk, for example. Like milk is white, and so like you don't, unless it's like chocolate
Milk comes out of the cow white. You can't choose its color.
Well, I
By
mean,
your logic, trees are racist because they're brown to white people.
not necessarily for trees, because you can like change the wood's color. Like
Okay,
you've seen like,
color.
yeah, but that doesn't happen.
Okay, and that doesn't happen to trees.
Well, I mean, it does. You've probably seen like a white furniture. You've probably seen brown furniture,
And
right?
you've probably saw chocolate milk.
Wait, you kind of cut out.
You've probably saw chocolate milk.
I mean, I have, but the thing with chocolate milk is it has more sugars, more fats, more things like that. So it's not necessarily the color part. It's more. This kind of goes into why the African American community's like obesity skyrocketed, because a study done by, I think it was a Harvard peer reviewed study, showed that you're attracted to colors of your race, which is actually why they saw the job disparity, because white people, it's about familiarity. So with familiarity, for instance, you are more likely to be, to choose somebody based on how familiar you are to them. And this was a peer-reviewed study by Harvard, right? So this is why the job disparity affected African Americans, because in some cases, even African Americans chose white people over black people just because of this familiarity aspect. And so when African Americans are familiar with chocolate milk, they are more likely to drink it. Therefore, this leads to higher obesity rates in the African American community. However, white people are more likely to drink white milk just because of the familiarity aspect of it.
I'm confused. But how can you call milk racist?
It's not necessarily that milk itself is racist. It's that the distributors of it, right? So obviously, I'm not trying to call the cow racist, right? I'm not trying to argue that animals are racist.
I mean, where it comes from, so that has to be what you're implying.
Well, you could also say it comes from the distributor or the seller, right? So if a farmer takes the milk and they give it to the distributor gives it to the stores. Wait, what?
He didn't make it.
Oh, he didn't make it, but he's choosing to give it out. The cow doesn't choose to give its milk out. It's actually, this is why I'm, well, actually, no, we shouldn't really talk about vegetarianism, but this is why I guess I would be vegetarian, just because for the aspect of, we probably shouldn't go into vegetarianism, but the cow doesn't choose basically to give its milk. It is milked. It's forcibly milked, right? The milk is actually supposed to go to the babies. So when the distributors give out the milk, it actually shows it's an aspect of racism, because when they give out the milk, the familiarity aspect. Now, if they made chocolate milk healthy, I would totally be fine with that. But when the chocolate milk affects African American communities disproportionately more than white communities, just because of the familiarity aspect, which is like a philosophical thing, which basically just shows that you're familiar. You choose colors that you're most familiar with.
I'm in love with chocolate milk.
I mean,
and when it comes to preference, unless her name's Brenna Brown, I prefer African American women.
Well, I mean, that's kind of anecdotal, because just on average, like, white people drink more white milk and African Americans drink more chocolate milk.
I mean, how can you prove that? I drink chocolate milk all the time. I've never been given an interview on what milk I prefer.
Well, I mean, of course, the study doesn't expand to every single person. That's why they have sample sizes, right? Of 1,000, 2,000, 3,400, 3,000 people, right? And so when they're just looking at it, it's a philosophical concept. I'll explain the familiarity philosophical concept. Basically, just so we're on the same page here, basically what it means is you are more likely to choose things that you are familiar with. So if white people are familiar with the color white, because this is kind of going into black on black crime, because a lot of people claim it's just because, like gangs, things like that, but it's actually because they live in like the same area, right? Black people are more likely to live next to black people, white people are more likely to live next to white people. This is most likely because of the history of slavery and Jim Crow, just because they had black people all in one area, white people all in one area, things like that. And then going into the familiarity aspect, white people are more familiar with white people, white colors, right? Or maybe not white colors, but white people. Just how African Americans are more familiar with black people, and so that's why they choose chocolate milk over white milk, and white people choose white milk over black milk. Now, it's definitely not to say that all white people don't drink chocolate milk, right? Or not to say that all black people drink all black milk. However, it does go into the part where African Americans disproportionately choose black milk over white milk, and same with white people with white milk over black milk. And that's totally fine, right? Because I support individual choice in some cases, only like a few cases, individual choice. But in the part where chocolate milk is actually more damaging to yourself than actual milk, because in some cases, milk is actually healthy, but chocolate milk is usually not healthy. It has fats, sugars, things like that. So I'm totally fine with there being chocolate milk. However, I think if the government could, take it away for now, maybe implement it later when distributors don't, maybe incentivize like making chocolate milk healthier, just so that we just to make sure that African Americans don't disproportionately choose it and then get overweight, and then they can't afford it due to racism, things like that.
I've never been more confused in my life.
Oh, what are you confused about? I'm totally okay with explaining anything like about racist milk, things like that.
No, I just never thought that we would live in a day in which milk was racist.
Well, I don't think milk is racist. I think the distributors of milk is racist.
No, I know, we've been over this.
Yeah.
And this has nothing to do with our debate, but I agree with you. Junk foods, chocolate milk, they're cheaper. Like, you can get McDonald's for $1. Yeah. But, if you want a healthy smoothie, it takes about $8 from your local Smoothie King.
Like, for instance, when you go to a burger place, right? And so what color is usually like the outside of the, and we understand, right? McDonald's typically isn't that healthy. It's cheap, but it's not necessarily healthy, right? So the color of the meat, right? At least the outside color, you could argue it's like, medium rare, red on the inside, but usually on the outside, it's black, it's brown usually. So this goes back into the familiarity aspect, how, I mean, I'm obviously not like calling out a conspiracy here or anything, but
you definitely are.
It's not conspiracy. It's not conspiracy. Oh man, I can't speak. It's not conspiracy. Yeah, conspiracy. It's not a. Sorry for that. It's not a conspiracy. Just because it's proven that the philosophical concept of the familiarity aspect is shown in everyday life. Now, if you could give me, I guess the burden of proof would be on you to prove to me that it I guess that it wouldn't be racist, just because if let's just say meat was white, fish is white, that's why white people eat it more. Burgers tend to be brown.
Why do you have to make food related to race? Like, here's my thing. Race should never be an issue.
I agree with you.
When people bring it up.
I agree race shouldn't be an issue, but I think it's important we acknowledge that the history in America causes a lot of racial disparities today. And I agree we shouldn't bring race into everything. Like shirts, for example, like how white people are more likely to choose like brighter shirts and African Americans darker shirts.
Oh my gosh, this man is crazy. I choose my shirts.
You're wearing a white shirt and a white hat right now. You're kind of just proving my point.
Oh my gosh, I'll give you that. I was not planning for that, but hey, look.
You have a great. There's not really a gray race, but that's okay.
Okay, you got me on that one, but I'll guarantee you that's just a coincidence.
But you're not subconscious about choosing specifically white colors, right? Because you unconsciously do it, right? Because and actually there was a study done by I can get it for you right now. I'm not going to send it in the chat, but I can get it to you right now. Basically, what it was a peer-reviewed study. MSU, right? MSU. So it was a peer-reviewed study done by MSU to show that cops actually went after people with less bright clothes. So, for instance, if you were wearing a bright neon shirt,
how can you make these studies? Just because
that's a sample size of around 5,000 people that showed that cops were actually more racist towards people with darker clothes.
Oh my gosh, no! What it comes down to is the sample size how severe in which the crime they were committing was. The cops they could give two craps about what you're wearing. What they care about is the actions in what you're doing.
Well, I think if that were true, we wouldn't see him. So, like for example, right? Cops use the excuse that Muslims are wearing more clothing, which they do, as an excuse to pull them over more. Now, would you say you associate more baggy clothing with African Americans or lower riding clothing with African Americans? Would you say that?
No, I would compare. No,
Because at least
I am just as scared of a white man in chains than I am of a black man with his pants bagging. It has nothing to do with the color of the skin.
Oh, yeah,
it
I
has
agree.
everything to do with the way in which they make themselves appear.
I agree. So the thing with baggy clothing though, so cops with an IAT. Do you know what an IAT is? Basically, it's a study where they give different colors, different symbols, different wording, and then they decide based on if you think they are dangerous or not. So this IAT study from Cornell, it actually showed that cops associated more black language, more black colors with bad things and more with good things. But that's a little besides the point of African Americans are more likely to wear baggy clothing. And why is this? Well, baggy clothing is typically, cheaper. There's not a lot of expensive baggy clothing. A lot of expensive clothing is actually quite tight. So
you can get anything in any size for the same price.
I agree.
Okay, then your statement's debunked. You're just doing some bullshit.
It's not debunked because if there's actually a peer-reviewed study done by Stanford and it actually showed that these clothing.
What exactly is black language?
Black language. So all right. So perfect. So this would be an example of let's just say, okay, would you say that the N-word is used more by white people or by African Americans? Because I would say African Americans, just because it's socially unacceptable for white people to say it. So that's why I would say.
I would agree with that.
Yes,
but
that would be an example of black language. Also, a certain rap culture. Rap culture, I'd say that'd be predominantly done by African Americans. Not just because not even because of racial bias, just because of the culture they grew up in, Jim Crow, slavery, things like that.
Just because, let me think of a word. Okay, ain't. White people, Southern boys like to use the word ain't a lot.
Or like y'all, things like that.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that black people can't use it. So why do you have to relate everything to race?
Well, I think it's important we relate most things to race because I think we can see why race.
All that's doing is dividing the country.
Well, I would disagree with that, and here's why. I think you would agree. I think we would both agree that America was founded, or maybe not founded, but at least had a large history of racial inequality, right? A large history of that. And I think it doesn't just automatically go away. And once we realize it doesn't automatically go away, we can understand that a lot of lasting effects of Jim Crow slavery happen today. And let's just say this. Let's just say I totally concede the point there is no systemic racism today at all, even though I don't agree with that. There are still lasting effects from Jim Crow, things like that, which I think we have to solve, which is why I think it's important we find every little issue we can and try to apply race. Some things you can't try to apply race to, but if we understand that America has a racist history, I think it's important that we understand that there are still lasting effects that we should try and solve. And if we just disregard race, kind of like how you said we shouldn't try and put race in everything, I think that's all well and good intentioned, as long as there isn't a racial history, which there would be, as there is in America.
Then how was Barack Obama elected president?
I think that's a good question. So I think the main reason Barack Obama was president was because of the societal change in how tired people were. People were tired that only white straight men were winning presidential elections. And I also think Obama was a pretty good president. I think he was elected not really based off of his skin color, but I think he was based on good ideals. But I think no. Do you disagree?
If he was a white man, he would not be president. I'll tell you that right now.
Really?
He probably wouldn't have even been in the race if he
he is probably like on my top list of favorite presidents. So I think he had like a lot of good ideals. He legalized gay marriage. He did a lot of other good things, and he was also the first black president, which I think was a huge milestone for America. And I think it was really good.
It was. I'm glad we had a black president.
Yeah, me too. I think it's important that next we get a woman president too.
In which, it takes more than the black vote to win an election.
Yeah,
you
but a
know.
lot of white people, and white people should feel guilty, but I think out of white guilt, a lot of people voted for Obama just because, are you going to keep voting for white people, or are we going to make a change in America?
I know I'm not going to vote ever off the color of someone's skin. I'm going to vote
Wait,
from
why?
the policies in which they put in place.
Wait, why? Don't you want to,
Because
because we want more diversity. A study done by,
I could care less. Race has no input in
yeah,
politics.
I would
It has
agree. Race has no input in politics if there wasn't a racial history that affected it. I mean, would you say it's harder for an African American to win an election than a white man, even if they had the same
No.
ideals? No? Then why is there only been? Are you insinuating that African Americans just coincidentally had worser ideals than every white person?
I'm
Or-
not arguing. I've already told you in the past we have been systemically
Yeah,
racist.
but there's
I'm
still
saying
lasting
in the
effects,
year-
right? There's still
in
lasting
the year-
effects, right?
No, there's not. In the year
There's not
2000,
lasting. No, there's
and
no lasting.
how was Obama president?
Just because there's anomalies doesn't. Okay, that's like saying Oprah Winfrey is rich, therefore black people can't be poor. That's like, because basically what you're insinuating is just because a black person made a milestone, the milestone isn't harder for any. Because white people can be presidents, black people, Asians, anybody, right? However, it's important we realize there are certain hurdles in their place that we need to try and get rid of. So for African Americans, this would be being disproportionately poor. We should try and help them with that. It would be getting.
If you want to get out of poverty,
Mm-hmm.
all you have to do is spend time in school, work on your education.
We can talk about education. All right, so
Get a
you.
good degree. That's
know-
all it takes, and you're out of poverty.
Yep. So I
Getting a
agree.
degree.
I totally
So
agree with you.
No one is stopping anyone from getting out of poverty. It just comes down to how bad do you want it.
Yeah, I would agree to an extent, and here's where I disagree with you. So I was talking about the everlasting effects. So one everlasting effect would be African Americans being disproportionately poor. Now you can say just go to school, get a job, but it's important we realize how public schools are funded. Public schools are funded by property taxes, right? And how are property taxes determined? They're determined by how much your property is worth, and why when you're disproportionately poor, you're obviously not going to be buying a rich house in a rich neighborhood. No, you're going to be buying a poor house in a poor neighborhood. Therefore, the property taxes from these poor neighborhoods are going into public schools, right? However, if we look at some white if we look at the average median income, it's 100,000 compared to African Americans, which is 10,000, and we look at these property taxes, they're going into public schools. Hardly any property taxes going into these African American public schools because of the everlasting effects of systemic racism. Now, if you disagree with me on this, my question to you would be, why are African Americans poor? And if it is not racism or systemic racism or institutional racism, what would it be?
Well,
I
my
think that's a
question to you first is, what do you consider a black school? Because there isn't just white.
in a black neighborhood.
Okay, well,
predominantly
white
black
people
neighborhood.
can still go there.
Actually, that's not true. You have to stay in your school district.
Okay, but there can still be white people that live in a black neighborhood. It's
Oh,
not just
yeah.
everything is not determined off your race. The
Oh, yeah,
second we
I would definitely
agree
agree.
with
White
racial
people-
issue,
I would
we will
def-
start
yeah.
making somewhere as a country.
I would definitely agree. White people are allowed to be in black neighborhoods. However, when we look at predominantly black neighborhoods, they're significantly underfunded public schools due to their property taxes. And you could argue, even if they weren't, before public schools were funded by property taxes, the government underfunded them. A lot of instances where there's everlasting effects. So I answered your question on, how white people can still be in black neighborhoods and how it still affects them just because, predominantly black neighborhoods, right? So now I guess my question to you as a counter would be, if not racism, why are African Americans 10 times more poor than white people?
I mean, personally, I feel like you're kind of stereotyping. I feel like black people can be rich just as easily as any white person could. But if you look at the statistics,
They aren't.
if you look at the statistics, I feel like it just comes down to work ethic, the culture, the way in which we're raised.
Culture and the way in which they're raised. All right. So would you say that black culture has been affected by racism? And would you say the way of which they are raised would be affected by racism? And if not, are you saying that black culture automatically has a less work ethic? Because if not racism, what else? If you're saying it's because of culture and because of how you're raised, well, I guess how you're raised could be a part of your culture, right? So if you're saying if not systemic racism or racism at all, what would it be? Because if you're saying it comes down to individual choice and how hard you want to work, you'd have to argue that African Americans don't want to work as hard as white people. because that, by definition, if African Americans are more poor, and the way to get less poor for you would be to work harder or to work smarter in some cases. You would agree with working smarter makes you, a little more rich at least, right?
Right.
Right. So you'd have to argue that African Americans don't want to work as hard as white people, which I don't think you'd want to make that argument at all.
I feel like it comes down to culture and the way in which you're raised.
So what has affected black culture, if not
Do what?
racism? What has affected black culture, if not racism, in America at least?
I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
I do have an answer for that, because we can attribute it. We can see patterns, right? So let's just say the pattern of laziness. There's something called post-traumatic slave disorder. So basically, here's what happened. So African American families, what they did was they trained their kids to. This is during slavery, by the way, so not now at all. They trained their kids to be have a worse worth ethic. And this was so that slave owners or slave people who wanted to buy slaves wouldn't buy them. Because why would you want somebody that's lazy and did nothing, right? You wouldn't want to buy them. And the value of the slave would go way down, right? And so we can see this through black culture and how it originated during slavery times. And then we can see how that's lasted through these years. Because if you don't have an answer to why black culture is, then what would you say is your best guess to attributing it? Because what's the one thing that's affected African Americans throughout America through all these years? You can argue that it was only in the 1900s and below. You could argue that it's the 2000s and below, so not like 2001, but like 1999, right? But the everlasting effects still affect them, regardless of whether you want to say it exists now or not.
No, I feel like a lot of it has to do with mainstream media. They're taught a false narrative. They're taught that if you're black, you're automatically oppressed, you're automatically discriminated against.
Well, they are.
Nope, let me finish.
Okay.
You're automatically going to have it harder in life. Mainstream media teaches you that if you're black, basically you need to give up. And I feel like that is doing a disservice to the American people. That is telling them that because of the color of your skin, you have lesser opportunity. And that's just not true in the year 2020.
Well, I think this kind of goes on to, how the oppressor cannot, see that they are oppressing. So I think for you wouldn't see yourself as an oppressor, right? You probably just think, like I'd say you'd probably, I don't want to say what you think, but you don't think yourself as an oppressor, right? Or you don't think there's white privilege, right? So I'd say the problem with that is people who usually have privilege cannot acknowledge they have it, right? So I think it's important that we discuss this, which is why, I'm glad you're debating with me, because I think it's good we have, conversation in America. So basically what I'm kind of getting at is, if you do not know why black culture the way it is, you don't know why they're raised a different way, I think it's important that we look for specific patterns. These patterns would be post-traumatic slave disorder, how the slaves were taught.
That never justifies the crime rates.
Yeah, sure it does. And I can tell you why if you'd like. So for crime rates, for example, right? So there was if you just want to look so single motherhood families, how I was talking about how the racist in the racist law of the welfare state disproportionately affected African Americans. So basically here let me give you some statistics. So kids living under single motherhood families, they are way more likely to commit crimes, commit murder, go to jail, 20 times more likely to go to jail. What?
I am a person that lives in a single family household. I only have a mother, and I never have made an excuse and said, because I don't have the privilege of having a dad, that has never made me think that, okay, it's fine, I'm going to go rob a store, or I'm going to go commit this crime. I feel like we need to stop making excuses and own up and just build off our struggles and make sure we don't do the same mistakes when it's our opportunity to become parents.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We should try not to make the same mistakes. However, that's a little bit of anecdotal evidence, because that's like saying, so let's just say white people are more likely to do drugs. Let's just say somebody said that to me, and I said, well, I'm white. I've never wanted to do drugs. That's anecdotal, because that's taking away from the sample size area. I'm not saying 100% of single motherhood families want to go and shoot somebody, rob a store. I mean, I don't think you've committed any crimes, right, in your single motherhood family. So what I'm getting at here, though, is how the single motherhood rate in the African American community from before the welfare state was 10%, after it was 70%, right? So we can obviously see the distinction there. And it only affected African American communities, right? It didn't affect white communities because of the specific implementation in certain property zones that were significantly lower in wealth than white communities, which were 10 times more rich, right? So I think we cannot say that we don't know why black culture is the way it is, because I think we do know, and we can see it through patterns. And if not, and you don't know the answer, I think it's important that we do look for the answer, because I don't think the answer is, oh, well, it isn't racism, but it's some, other unexplainable factor why black people are poor in America. It's not racism, but, it's some external factor, something about culture. And you did mention culture. However, I think it's important we find how that culture started. We can see the culture starting early in slavery and Jim Crow.
So, last question before we kind of get on to our second topic, because right now at this rate, we're going on an hour and a half.
Yeah, I agree.
So we got to kind of speed it up. But I would like to ask, what would you attribute to the reasoning of African American families? Why is a father not in the household in so many cases?
That's because, okay, so let me explain to you the welfare state, because that's kind of been my answer for a lot of things. So the welfare state basically said, if you're getting married, you're not going to get as much money from welfare. Now, what did this do? It incentivized black moms or black dad, or no, mostly black moms, because they were the ones typically at home, mothers are typically the ones raising the kids, at least in America. Maybe not in Sweden, but at least in America. So basically it prompted African American men to leave because they're getting more money. Who doesn't want more money? I mean, would you want more money? Because basically,
family.
Yeah, and some people don't. So here's the thing. Let's just say African Americans didn't prefer family. Well, that's just ruining family values. You know what else ruined family values? Slavery. It tore the family apart. That's an example of a pattern.
I'm not going to agree with it, but at least you have an answer for it. So yeah. I'll give you that much. Okay, now would you prefer abortion for our second topic, or freedom of speech?
Abortion sounds good, and then we can end with freedom of speech. And maybe we could do a couple of maybe Trump's policies that I disagree with or that you agree with, things like that at the end.
Okay. So how long, or in what cases do you think abortion should be legal, and up to how many weeks?
Well, I'm a full supporter of, my body, my choice, so I would go all the way up till birth.
Okay. Can you explain why?
Yeah, so basically, I'm not necessarily disagreeing that it's a human life. However, I think our society, at least our society, where our morals revolve around if that person or if that human is a human person. So I'm not necessarily saying it's not a human life, because of course it has human cells. It's a human life, right? However, what I'm saying is it isn't a human person. And I think personhood is what gives somebody value. And I think if somebody's value is lesser than the others, and then you are not purposely, I'm sure the fetus can't really think, so it's probably not intentionally trying to hurt the mother, but in a lot of cases, you would support, like, I guess, the view of forced birth, correct?
I believe everybody is entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that does begin at conception. So yes.
All right, perfect. So you would agree. All right, perfect. So basically what I'm trying to say is I see the fetus as not necessarily a part of the human species, just because let's just play the devil's advocate here. Let's just say I do think it is a part of the human species. I don't think that the woman's right to certain let's just go into this. So mental states, right? We look at mental states after birth. After birth, women are 10 times more likely to suffer from a mental disorder. No, you disagree?
Yeah, no, that's statistically proven. If you have an abortion, you're 155% more likely to commit suicide, 133% times more likely to develop stress disorders and anxiety. So
I can debunk those studies for you. I believe you're talking about
debunk facts. You cannot debunk facts.
No, but you can debunk the questions and sample sizing, because the thing is, though, after abortion, guess the percentage of how many women regret it.
After an abortion?
Yeah, guess how many women regret it?
Probably many. Because
nope, that's actually only about 2% of, or 2 to 4% actually was the number. I don't want to be dishonest and give the lowest amount, so I'll say 2 to 4%, right? Those were the amount of women who regretted abortion. So if abortion is so bad and it gives all these mental disorders, why would practically no women regret it? Because obviously, if something's going to give you mental disorders and mental things, you would want to regret it. However, the women understand that it is in her best interest to get one, and here's why. It's in her best interest. First of all, we talk about the adoption system. The adoption system is broken. Would you agree?
I would agree.
All right, perfect. So when the child I mean, a lot of I don't want to strawman you, but you're probably going to bring up, I don't want to misrepresent your argument, but you're probably going to bring up how there are way more parents looking to adopt than actually. Okay, yeah, perfect. So you're going
I
to
would bring that up, yes.
all right, so here's the problem with that. A lot of those people willing to adopt are way farther away than the people who actually need to be adopted. And here's why. So a lot of the people that want to adopt are in places such as, large cities, right? That's why the number is so high. A lot of people want to adopt, right? But a lot of the people who need adoption, because there's a difference between want and then you're allowed to. The average adoption costs around $40,000. Obviously, those 2 million people aren't going to be able to pay $40,000 to an adoption facility. Also, it's a long amount of time, right? Because the adoption system is pretty broken. And so when we're looking at how hard it is to adopt, right? Maybe if we made the adoption system easier, that would help your point. However, we're talking as of right now, right? We're talking about if they go into that adoption system and how it affects them, right? So let's just look at some statistics. So people in the foster care system are way more likely to commit crime. No, you mentioned how you're a single motherhood family, right? And you don't want to shoot people. I'm definitely not saying that everybody in foster care is going to do that. However, it's more likely, and this actually goes into my point about I definitely don't want to bring this back to systematic racism. However, it talks about how single parenthood families are more likely to do it, and no parent families, just kids, are more likely to do it. So a lot of them are more likely to end up in jails, costing the taxpayer way more than it actually would. More crimes, more things like that. So I think it's important we see the pros and the cons. Let's just say it was.
There's never going to be a pro to ending an unborn child's life.
Yeah, there is, because it's not a child.
Yes, it is.
By definition, a child has to be born.
No, but it is scientifically proven that life begins at conception. The definition of a fetus is an unborn child.
Oh, that's only from Oxford. But the thing is, though, they're like Stanford. There's a one. So you basically, let's just say, the more definitions that correspond with me would agree with me, and the more with you, right? The only definition where it even says unborn child, right? It doesn't even correlate the two. It just says unborn child, right? It actually correlates it with just the pro-life movement, right? So if we look at the amount of definitions that correspond with what I'm saying, where it has to be born, it heavily outweighs the Oxford definition of how unborn baby is typically a part of, the pro-life movement and what they say. So it doesn't necessarily say that the unborn baby is that, but we can just call it an unborn baby, right? But that doesn't really, I think we can.
So my question to you is, what is the difference between a child in a womb and an 8-inch travel out of the vagina?
All right, perfect.
What makes it different?
All right, so that's a good question. So number one, real world experiences. So when you're in the womb, you're not going to be able to see people. You're not going to be experiencing. You're not going to be able to feel the wind against you. And
Absolutely. But that child will do it. That child will feel all of those feelings.
Okay,
if
so
you don't deny it that right, and you're denying it that right, which is immoral.
All right, perfect. So would you say potentiality gives somebody an aspect of personhood or potential personhood, and we should protect potential and value it the same?
When it comes to children, yes.
All right, so basically what you're saying is the value of potential would be the same as the value of you and me.
I believe that a child that is about to be born is just as valuable as me and you. Yes.
All right, so you'd probably say, like, if left to its natural necessities, the potential is valuable.
Yes.
All right, perfect. So let's just look at attempted murder and murder. Would you agree that attempted murder, if left to its natural processes, in some cases, would lead to murder? I mean, you kind of have to answer yes here because, of course, if the police don't intervene or somebody doesn't intervene, it turns into murder. So let me ask you this. Should attempted murder be the same value as murder? Because one has the potential to become murder, but one actually is murder. So do you think that attempted murder should be the same value as murder? Because if left to its natural processes with no one intervening, it in most cases would become murder. You would value it the same.
That's a great, yeah. I do. They had the same intent. If it weren't for the police intervening, then they would carry out those actions. So yes, absolutely.
All right, so do you understand why society doesn't see it that way?
Not necessarily, no.
All right, so let me explain to you why. So when we're talking about the philosophical philosophical theory of value, we treat things as society as how they are valued at that very moment, right? We restrict children's rights. Like, for instance, children cannot necessarily get investing accounts on their own. Children cannot drive unless they're 16, things like that. Children will have the potential to do those things. However, we don't value children as the same as adults, and we restrict them heavily. And this is because we understand that even though they have the potential, their overall values aren't the same. So if you were to argue that potential, if left to its natural processes, would still have the same value, you would also have to argue that children should be allowed to smoke, children should be allowed to drive, children should be, I'm talking about 8-year-olds here, should be allowed to drive, definitely not 16-year-olds. They can still be considered children, right? But if you're saying that the potential value is the same as the actual value, then you'd have to argue for all these rules and regulations that we have for a
No.
reason.
You're completely taking everything out of context, and then you're saying
It's a logical consistency test, so it's not really
you're
a
saying
contextual.
because one thing is legal that makes it right. Legality does not equal morality. Slavery was once legal. That does not make it right. Like you said, attempted murder is not viewed as harshly as actual murder. Just because it's a law, like you were saying, systematic racism. Systematic racism was once a law. That does not make it right.
Oh, I'm not. That's kind of a straw man because I'm not arguing from legally. I'm arguing, do you think it's morally okay? Do we let children drive? Do we let children smoke? So that's kind of a straw man because I'm not saying
there's a huge difference between saying should we let children drive and should we kill an unborn child.
No, okay, you're doing this. So basically, this is a logical test, right? So I'm not comparing the two, right? Basically, no. Here's what I'm doing. I'm saying if you value potential as the same value as the aftermath, the ends before the means before the ends, what you are essentially saying is we should value children as adults, because do you agree that children have the potential to become adults? I mean, you kind of have to answer yes here, right?
Yes,
but why don't we value them the same? Why do we not value them the same and give them the same rights? Because
in due time, if left to the natural, to their natural instances or whatever the word is,
they're going to turn into adults, right?
Into children, or
Right.
excuse me, they will develop into adults.
All right, perfect. So so let me give you an example here. So a child commits a crime. Let's just say it's shoplifting, right? Or let's just say it's something like that. And then we see an adult commit a crime. Let's say it's also shoplifting. So let's just say that the child, right? If you think that potential value is the same as the actual end value or the middle value, because it's a spectrum, right? Once we distinguish that you think that potential value, if left to its natural processes, it's the same as the after value. All right, so now that we've distinguished it, any questions so far?
Well, I know where you're going with this, and statistically, kids that commit crime, are going to commit crime when they're older too.
But are they charged for the same? They aren't, right?
At the time, no. And that goes back to my point. Legality does not equal morality.
No, I'm not saying that.
With laws. You're trying to tell me that because it's a law, it's right, and that's not accurate.
No, I'm asking you the question of morally. Do you think it's morally? All right, okay, I'm going to try and, stay away from legality as much as I can because I think it's a moral debate rather than a legal debate. I would agree with you on that. So basically what I'm essentially saying is so I guess we can just answer this one question, right? Do you believe morally, not legally at all, do you believe morally children should have the same restrictions and non-restrictions as adults? And if so, why? Or if not, or if so, why? Do you think they should have the same moral rights, same moral punishments, same moral anything?
They're still developing.
Oh, perfect. All right. So are you essentially saying
within time, yes, like a child when it's first born in 18 years, if left and it continues to grow, he'll then be an adult when he turns 18. The same thing with an unborn child, and I just do not think that it is morally acceptable to kill that child just because you can't keep your pants up.
Okay, well, you're kind of going into the blue line logical fallacy, and basically what that fallacy is it's kind of misrepresenting, what I'm saying, right? So basically, what you're saying is that it has the potential to do something, but that's not answering my question of should we value them the same. So let me give you this, right? If we were to value children and adults the same, this would mean that children could do many things. They could drive, they could buy cigarettes. They would get charged for the same crime, but you might call me, like going to legality, appeal to authority on that, right? So I'm not going to mention same crime, but I'm asking morally, should they get punished for the same crime? Because, and here's why. If we are protecting fetuses because they have the potential to do something, right? We give them the same rights as a human because they have the potential to be a human, right? Or we give them the potential to personhood, which gives them value. And you agreed earlier that that the fetus has the same value as a human, right? However, the part where you're kind of avoiding, maybe intentionally or not intentionally, is what I'm saying is we value children less just because even though they have potential to be adults, they aren't adults, right? We look at people
Do you believe an adult is less valuable, or excuse me, do you believe an adult is more valuable than a 12-year-old?
I think that's a perfect question, and I think in terms of do they have more potential because you're using potential as a place for value, yes. However, I don't think if so, yeah, I would say that yes.
Okay, let me ask you this question: if a 48-year-old were killed and a 12-year-old were killed, do you believe the killer deserves the same sentence?
I would actually say that the person who killed the 12-year-old. These are good questions. I'll definitely think about it. However, what I'm saying is, if I'm going off of your definition of potentiality, because I'm not saying potential equals value, you're saying potential equals value. So basically, the problem with the question you just asked me was you're assuming that I think potential equals value. However, I don't. I don't think potential equals value. So if potentiality did mean value, actually, wait, no, that question just disproved your whole point, because you're showing that even if somebody has value, we still value it the same, right? Even if somebody's a different age. Oh, you just proved my point, because basically, okay.
How so?
All right, so basically this is how. So you were saying that potentiality defines value, right? However, you haven't answered. Yeah, you think potentiality is value. You already answered this question, so we don't have to go to it, right? So if potentiality means value, yet you don't want to value children and adults the same, right? Then that just disproves your whole point that potentiality means value.
No, not at all.
Okay, so you think that children and adults should be, treated the same in everything, given the same rights? Why? Because children aren't adults.
You keep using hypothetical situations and avoiding the whole topic of you're killing an unborn child because you don't know what unprotected sex is.
Well, that's not necessarily true.
That is 95% of abortion cases are because they were not prepared for the consequences.
That's 48% actually.
What is it?
It's 48%, actually 48.15.
No, it is actually 98% or 95%. Excuse me. How would you get 45%?
This is I misspoke. It's actually 48.16. Yeah, 48.16, and this is according to the CDC. Other reasons include
the other 52%.
Well, other reasons include you want to know what the other 52% is?
Yeah.
All right, perfect. So other 52, incest, rape, but those are minorities, so I'm not going to talk about those.
Rape is 0.5% of all of them.
Here's where you would be a little, misconstruing the point. Would you say that women are open about having an abortion because of rape? Would you go, I'm not going to say if you, but I'm just going to say women aren't usually open about if they were raped or not. And also women aren't.
If I were a woman, I would much rather say I was raped than I had unprotected sex and don't want a child.
But a lot of them live in fear, and here's why. Let me tell you why. When you're getting an abortion, a lot of those women believe it's none of the business of the givers of the abortion why they need it. They sometimes ask you why, but you're not entitled to give that.
Then you just kind of debunked your own statement, and your logic, neither of our numbers are accurate because we can never entirely know.
Well, not necessarily, and here's why.
Yes, exactly. You just debunked your own statement as well as mine, according to your logical fallacy.
Well, I didn't really give a logical fallacy, but basically here's what I'm saying. I'm saying if not all rapes are reported, you can't say it's a statistical minority. I can't say it's a statistical. I can't say that either.
It would be a sample size.
Well, the sample size wasn't. No, it's not a sample size. It's all abortions ever reported, and not everybody reports an abortion. Second of all, not everybody reports the reasoning. Right? Let's just say somebody rapes me, right? And I'm a woman, and I need an abortion, and I go to get an abortion, right? I'm not always going to tell the giver of the abortion why I need it, nor would a lot of other people, right? 85%, actually no, it's like 97% of all rapes aren't reported, right? Because if we're looking at specific instances of why they need it, actually, wait, never mind. I think this is actually kind of irrelevant because I think it all goes down to the morality of it. You think killing a lifeless human being is wrong, and I think killing a lifeless human being is okay. Would you like
I
me
just
to
don't
give you?
understand how you'll ever think killing an unborn child is okay, because if you leave it and let it continue to grow, it is going to form into a child.
Because I don't think that the right of the fetus outweighs the right of the woman to her bodily autonomy. The woman
If
has
you
a right,
let-
at least morally, right? I cannot use your organs without your consent. Now, you could say the mother consented to having the baby,
when she had sex.
but however, the baby didn't ask the mother, and I think they should. Oh, I mean, it's kind of
and the
impossible to
mother
do that.
did not ask the baby.
Yeah, but that's kind of a burden of proof logical fallacy because if
No,
you're
I
using
just debunked your logical fallacy.
I didn't present the logical fallacy.
You said that the mother did not ask the child, or
Yeah.
you said the child did not ask the mother, and I said the mother did not ask the child.
Well, here's why the mother doesn't need to ask the child, and here's why. So let's just say you're an organ
You
donor.
don't- okay,
Nope,
okay,
can I
so-
finish? Wait, can I finish?
no,
This
no,
is really important.
this
I need to
is-
finish. This is really important. I need to finish. This is really important. All right.
Why?
Here's why. Okay. So the government cannot force you to be an organ donor. Here's why. You have the right to bodily autonomy, and the government doesn't need or can't force you unless you sign it, unless you sign a will, right? They cannot force you to give up your organs, right? Just how the mother isn't forced to give up her organs, right? So even in instances where the mother would be totally fine, right? I still think it should be her choice because, well, actually here, okay, I kind of think you're being almost a little sexist here just because you're trying to control women's bodies and not men's. That's kind of where I think the argument should lie.
No, I'm
Yes,
not.
you're trying to control
It
women's
is, half,
bodies.
it is half the man's DNA.
Okay, and the men usually just run off.
No, they don't.
Yes, that's actually true. After a baby. Okay, well, you're kind of debunking this because we agree that the single parenthood rate in the African American, you know, abortion disproportionately affects African Americans, right?
900 black babies are aborted every day.
Okay, good. So this is actually helping me, and here's why. And then the single motherhood rate is also high. Do you understand that abortion could be actually a cause of that? Just because when the abortion happens or when the baby gives birth, right, the parents usually leave, and that could be also another example. So I think the reason why it's a little sexist isn't I don't think you're a sexist guy. I just think the way you're interpreting it is a little sexist, right? I'm not going to call you racist. I'm not going to call you sexist because, you know, insults don't have any place in debate. However, I think the actual methodology is sexist, and here's why. So think of it like this. So there's been multiple studies of small instances of either intersex or just men giving birth, right? It is a small minority, but however men have given birth, right? You're not trying to control the man giving birth, right? You're controlling the woman. So I think the problem where it's well, I think
that's kind of how a baby is made.
well, yeah, but also men like okay. So for example, let's just use seahorses for example. Would you want to control seahorses' bodies if they were to because the male seahorse gives birth, right? So let's just hypothetically.
Using hypothetical situations.
Well, yeah, but hypotheticals are really good in debate. In fact, if I was pro-life, I would use so many hypotheticals that you aren't using. I could actually give you some if you'd like. They would help you out a lot.
No, it's because I don't use hypothetical situations when debating abortion.
Why not?
But
It's a philosophical argument. You should use hypotheticals. They would help. Okay, let me give you a couple that would help you. So here's one that would help you. All right, first off, so let's just say I've about 2 to 3 that we could use. So number one.
Here, if you want a hypothetical situation, I'll give you a hypothetical situation.
Perfect.
Okay, say you're going down the street,
Mhm.
and say you see.
I know where this is going. Yep, I know your hypothetical. I already know it.
You may see a deer in the road, but you aren't sure.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to slow down?
Am I going to slow down? I'm not sure though, right?
Yeah.
Are you asking me personally, me morally, me philosophically, me spiritually? What are you
I'm
asking?
asking you hypothetically. You wanted me to give you one, so I'm going to give you one.
Perfect. What I would do is I would keep going no matter what.
What? Why? You could risk hurting your car.
Yeah, but I could also okay, but here's the thing though. So the problem is, let me just ask you this. Tell me where this represents an abortion, because I think it's important that we attribute our hypotheticals to situations. So for instance, I attributed the potential theory of value to if the baby's potential is valuable, right? And so I gave you a couple hypotheticals about children. So tell me where if we should slow down or not attributes to the abortion.
So I'm basically saying, you said during the debate that you don't quite think that a fetus is a child.
Oh, I 100% know. I have a bunch of studies to prove that. So according to a study, it was actually a study done. Okay, you maybe call me like a little biased for that. It's actually done by Somalia.gov, right? And so in Somalia, Wait, okay. So you're in favor of banning things because they're morally wrong, not because they'd actually go, like, let's just say rape rates, if we made it legal, it would go down. You're still for legalizing it, right? Just because it's morally wrong. Or would you say that if something goes down, if it's legal, then that would actually be better? Because, the whole goal of legalizing it would be for it to go down. Which one would you choose? The morally wrong one, right?
So
Or
you're
just-
talking so fast, I've kind of lost the track.
Oh, my bad, totally. Actually, would you like to move on to, I guess, freedom of speech? Because we're kind of coming up on an hour here.
Yeah, if you'd like, we can.
All right, so my problem with freedom of speech is I think it's well intended. However, I think it's worse in practice. So here's why. First off, I think it's bad because, people can be racist, people can be sexist, I mean, not intentionally, but some things you've said have been maybe a little sexist or a little racist. I don't think you're a racist person or sexist, but, maybe what you've said has been just because you don't know about black culture, yet you were determining whether it has affected it or not, right? So I think the problem with freedom of speech is if people are using it to amplify their hate, racism, sexism, or things like that, I don't have a problem with, like, I wouldn't ban you from talking or things like that. I mean, I'd probably ban some Republicans, maybe like Trump, for talking, but definitely not you, because I think you're, very respectable, things like that. But I would definitely ban people, who are racist, sexist, some Republican ideals I would definitely ban. And I think,
Would you ban Democratic ideals?
would I ban what?
Democratic ideals?
No, I think Democrats are fine. I mean, democratic ideals, by definition, like, help, like, most people, and Republicans only help the rich people, and that's, like, proven. I can tell you why, by the way, if you'd like.
Let's just continue on with freedom of
All right,
speech.
yeah.
You don't want this to go on longer than in like an hour and 20 minutes.
All right, yeah. All right, so basically, yeah, because people can be racist, sexist. I mean, like, I would ban basically a little bit of what you said just because it was a little racist and sexist. That's basically my position. If something's racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic, about the LGBTQIA, then yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Do you like President Trump?
No, I dislike him a bunch. He's racist, he's sexist, transphobic, things like that.
Okay, then why would you want to give the power to the government to determine which speech is legal and illegal?
I don't want to do. I'm not sure if you saw my flag, but I'm an anarcho-communist. That's basically what my profile picture is. So basically, I would let the community decide what's hateful or not. So if we're just talking about in theory, first of all, Trump doesn't have all the power. He's the executive branch. Whenever he wants to pass a law, it has to be passed by the judicial, right? So I'm sure you know how laws are passed. So if I'm giving all the power to the government, it's not essentially giving it to Trump. I like a lot of people in the House of Representatives.
He's appointing most of the people in his administration.
But his administration doesn't decide that. So let me just give you this. So Trump wanted to pass a bill recently that would allow LGBTQ people to be discriminated from businesses, right? However, the House recently just determined that was hateful, sexist, things like that, or racist, things like that. And so they blocked it. That would be the same thing. And so in an anarcho-communist society, because, I'm an anarcho-communist, or I guess you could just refer to me as, just a communist, right? The community would be deciding, whether something is hateful or not. And if the majority of the people deem something hateful or not, I mean, you'd obviously say that, I think we can agree that the majority of people in America don't want racism or sexism or things like that. So if the community
think all
decides,
Trump supporters are racist?
Okay, so here's my thing about that. So I've recently, actually, no, you probably haven't watched any of my videos or anything like that. However, I don't think they themselves are racist. However, I think, I kind of worded that wrong. I would say they are racist, not because they are actually racist, but because they support one. It's like saying you support Hitler, but you don't support, like, the Holocaust, things like that. Like, one without the other doesn't really make sense.
Well, Trump won the election, so why would you want to give the power to the people?
Well, he didn't win. He won the electoral vote.
If that were the case,
he didn't win the popular vote.
If that were the case, then words you may not like would be deemed illegal or legal.
Well, that's not necessarily true.
Because the problem is when you start banning things, you're going to have a lot of people mad and you're going to have some people pleased, and then vice versa. I'm never going to say that the N-word is an acceptable word, but it should be legal.
Why should it be
these
legal?
protests. These
Okay,
protests.
Wait.
Do what?
Wait 1 sec. All right. So basically, here's my thing. So when you're talking about how Trump won, he won the Electoral College. I'm not saying the Electoral College should decide our speech, right? And if it did, you're right.
Presidency, so why would it not do the same thing for speech?
Because we're not going to base it off of the Electoral College. We don't base laws off the electoral. All right, let me ask you this. Do we base our laws off of how well they are passed in the Electoral College, or do we base them off of the people in power? We base them off the people in power, right?
Which goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. Why would you want to give the power to the government to decide what speech is legal and illegal?
I'm not. I don't want to give the power to the
You are,
government.
though.
That's why I'm pro 2A, so we can arm a lot of people, take down Trump, take down the government. Like I agree with you. We should definitely have the Second Amendment. We should get as many guns in the hands of people because we need to take down a tyrannical government. That's like probably the one thing we agree on, that we need to arm a bunch of people. And if we start arming the right
I
people,
wouldn't say that. If you're a law-abiding citizen and want to be able to protect your family, then absolutely use the Second Amendment. But saying everybody needs a gun, I would never agree with.
yeah, but 70% of all gun owners have at least committed at least one gun crime violation. This doesn't necessarily mean shooting somebody, but it means illegally owning a gun, things like that. This was according to huntingsports.com. And so that would actually be
We're on a sporting website to determine a statistic of that.
But that's a genetic logical fallacy, because it's not questioning the methodology. It's questioning, if it's reliable or not. This is actually why I don't say something like Fox News would be unreliable, because I think Fox News has a lot of stuff to say. And I think if we look at the methodology of that stuff, and, you probably think, CNN Mexico or CNN Canada or, CNN in all would be biased in some way. However, I think if I were you, I wouldn't actually question if it's reliable or not. I'd question the methodology of the studies they use. Obviously, some studies would be affected by bias, but I think there's a lot of non-biased studies from, maybe not like Fox News. I think Fox News actually is a little racist, but like CNN, for example, right? I think a lot of what they have to say is like really good. I agree with it a lot. Therefore, I wouldn't want to ban them from free speech. But for instance, so the original writers of the Constitution, like Ben Franklin, Abe Lincoln, Thomas Jefferson, all those people, right? When they wrote the Constitution, they intended it so that the government could have some control, right? They didn't want all control, which I don't want all control. I'm an anarcho-communist, which means I want to get rid of most of the government. However, I just think, when people are being racist, like I don't know why you'd want to make it so that people could say the N-word, because if we look at a study done by what was it called? I think it was the MSU peer-reviewed study. At least 57% of Trump supporters have at least said the N-word once in their life. And this is a sample size of actually 20,000 people. That's actually a large sample size, right? And it was all Trump supporters. So you can call the sample size low, only 20,000. However, sample size is...
the sample size irrelevant. You cannot ever determine. I mean, what are you going to do? Follow behind someone and see how many times they said the N-word in their lifetime?
Oh, no, it was actually self-reported. I mean, if we we can talk about cops, too. I mean...
I'll guarantee you that 55% of Trump supporters would never admit to saying anything.
Well, I mean, do you have empirical data for that? I have empirical data for mine, but that's kind of going into anecdotal. But, I mean, do you support all cops are bad? I mean, I do.
Obviously not, no.
I mean,
saying all cops are bad is a complete disservice to the American people. Because I can name instance after instance in which there are good cops out there.
No, that's not what it means. It doesn't mean each cop is individually bad. I'd say about maybe 14% of cops are bad, because actually a study, I think actually Mo Politics brought this up, but 86% of police officers have filed for KKK applications, and the sample size was so big. It was like 50,000. Like, you can't argue with the sample size, right? But these were self-reported. They actually went into their houses, and they actually found that.
No one is going to self-report that they were members of the KKK.
It wasn't self-reported. So basically, here's how it went.
If you believe these things.
That's not necessarily true, and let me tell you why. So let me just say, so let's just pretend you're the cop, right? I go into your home with your permission to look for something totally irrelevant, right? But then I find the KKK application, right? And so it's not...
15,000 cops had the same experience.
I mean, it wasn't the same experience, but I mean, yeah, of course it's not the same experience.
You're a brainwashed communist.
I mean, I think we can both agree insults don't have any place. I mean, we haven't even discussed communism, which we could. We can definitely discuss that later on. We have 20 minutes left, or I'm not sure how much time you want to spend on this. I could definitely go another hour at least. But basically what I'm trying to say is, I don't think that all cops are bad necessarily means every single individual cop is a bad person. What it means
when you're saying that, that's what it means.
I need to finish.
That is what...
No, it means they are bad in practice, meaning this. All right. They uphold a racist, classist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic system, right? So they're not necessarily bad people, but they are bad in the way they serve us. So, for instance, blacks are 3 times more likely to get shot by the police. Like, those cops are bad, right? But I'm not saying they are bad.
Ask yourself why. Black people make up 13% of the population and commit 55% of violent crime.
Actually, it's 37% of violent crime, but 20% of non-violent crime, just making sure you're on par with that. So it's actually 50% of homicides. So just, to help you out for your next debate, it's 50% of homicides. However, it is 37% of violent crime and 20% of nonviolent crime. So just so you know, you definitely don't want to get that mixed up. I know a lot of people on my side will definitely destroy you for that if you make that mistake. Tyler Bluntman actually cleared that up, and I'm not sure you know who that is, but he cleared that up, and that was good. Anyways, back to the point. I don't think we should go back to systemic racism, but I think using the 1350 is kind of a meme, and it's also a little dishonest and racist. And here's why. Because you're using it to justify why cops kill more black people, but that's not even the methodology of the study I'm using. The methodology is these are one white person, one black person. None of them are committing crimes. They're just walking along the street, right? And they're pulled over. Black people are more likely to be pulled over. It has nothing to do with crime because the methodology of the study I'm using has nothing to do with the actual socioeconomics. Let's just say 13% of the population did commit 50% of the crime. That doesn't change the methodology of the study used because it didn't use population. It used a white person and a black person, and they ran the simulations and the real world experiences. It was both. It was two, right? And it was peer reviewed by Cornell. And so when they found that African Americans are 3 times more likely to be pulled over, 5 times more likely to be killed by the police with it being racially motivated. And then they were also 10 times more likely to be arrested for a crime they didn't do or for so-called resisting, quote unquote, yet body cams later showed they weren't or it was unjustifiable.
Well, first off, we're not even on freedom of speech, but to debunk that, I would say you're not even mentioning how African Americans only make up 13% of the population.
But that's not the method. Well, that has nothing to do with the method. Okay, let me tell you the methodology. Maybe I wasn't as clear on that as I should be, and my apologies for that. Here's the methodology and how it was conducted, right? So let me first distinguish this. It has nothing to do with population. It has to do with implicit bias. Let me get on to my next contention. They ran the studies like this. There were white people and black people walking down a street, right? There was a cop. It was the same cop for situations. So if there was a white person walking by, the same cop pulled over the black people more amount of times for doing nothing. So it has nothing to do with population because the methodology of the study doesn't need population. It shows implicit bias in the police force. And now I think we should definitely go back to freedom of speech, but that's just where I stand on it. You can either try and debunk me on that, or we can just, agree to move on to freedom of speech.
Well, I'll just say I understand. I'm not trying to call you a liar in any way. Yeah. I'm not trying to say that, you're making these things up.
Yeah.
I just hope you can understand and kind of question how are some of these surveys conducted?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I've looked in the methodology.
How are they made? And I don't want to talk about it anymore. I want to continue on freedom of speech.
Yeah. Okay.
But I do want you to just maybe consider and question after this is over, how are all of these surveys conducted? How are these numbers figured out?
Well, for instance, I can tell you the method. This is the last thing, and then I guess you could just let me say this, and then we can move on. But basically this. So the studies are conducted very thoroughly, right? So a study showed that 65% of police hate at least one race or have said a racial slur on the usual, right? This isn't a one-time thing when your dad's telling you about it.
No, the survey conducted.
Okay, hold on. Let me finish, right? And at least 55 admitted hating 2 to 3 more races than the average person. The average person actually doesn't hate any races. And the surveys are conducted either by self-reports, by conclusive evidence, or actually no self-reports. I already said that, but things like that. But now we can move on to freedom of speech if you'd like. So back to my freedom of speech point.
Okay, so let me get a long little statement in because you've been talking a lot. No, not saying that's a bad thing, but
yeah, that's fine. That's fine. You can go.
So, in my opinion, freedom of speech. You go to the 1960s, the Civil Rights Act of 1963. Freedom of speech is what gave African Americans the right to say, hey, America is, being racist and, we need reform and we need change and we need rights for African Americans.
Yeah.
Then you go to women, women, they didn't have the right to vote for a long period of time and they had to fight for that. How? By using their freedom of speech, peaceful protest. Even in the year 2020, you look at everybody protesting. They're activating their freedom of speech, which does cross the line when we riot, but that's besides the point. You go to 2000, I think it was 2013. You can correct me if I'm wrong. When they were fighting with the legalization of gay marriage, how did they get their point across and say there's things wrong with the country? They used their freedom of speech. So, without freedom of speech, we would not have the rights we have today. and just trying to ban that, I feel like you maybe need to reconsider and understand how freedom of speech has given us the rights in which we have.
Yeah, but the thing with that is protesting for the right to vote isn't sexist nor is it racist. I'm advocating to ban hate speech or not free speech.
Okay,
I'm advocating to
I'm
ban.
sorry, but I have to intervene real quick.
Yeah.
I understand that, but in the year 1963, it was not viewed that way for Black people. Black people were not viewed that way. So if we're talking about the way in which we're looked at right now, you have to look at the way we used to be viewed, or excuse me, the way we used to view people. In 1963, Black people weren't viewed the same, and they weren't viewed the same until they got their message out. So yeah.
Well, basically, here's the thing. I'm not talking about how we view it. I'm talking about objectively viewing it, right? And so this would be done through a multitude of things. So as an anarcho-communist, we would view it as, how we perceive it in philosophy. So if we philosophically see somebody doesn't have the same rights as somebody else, that isn't racist or sexist to say that person should get rights. However, if somebody's saying they shouldn't get rights, that would be deemed as racist or sexist. So I think it's a little, maybe not racist, but maybe a little sexist, just because if we're just talking about the woman's right to vote, you're comparing that to something that would, at least in definitional terms, that would be perceived as racist or sexist. And so I think that would be sexist for you to deem it that way, just because philosophically somebody getting the equal right to vote, philosophically that isn't wrong.
Just because we're at this point in America now does not mean that at one point we weren't at that point. We had to activate our freedom of speech to get to the point in which we are at now and to give you the right to say these things. Only in America are you allowed to say, I hate President Trump and
That's
I hope, we take the power away from him.
In
other countries, saying you hate the president is not going to end well. And you couldn't do that without freedom of speech.
I will name you all the countries that you actually can do that. So you can do that in number 1, Finland. Number 2, Denmark. Number 3, Germany. Number 4, the UK. Wait. I need to get through my entire list of countries that allow free speech, since you have claimed America is the only country that allows that. Now,
okay, we can also you have until an hour and 20 minutes, and then I got to cut it.
Okay, then I guess I won't go on to, but we're ranked number 12 in freedom of speech because we still have banned books, we have banned movies, but a lot of other countries don't actually have banned movies or banned books. A lot of anti-Christian books or movies are banned. A lot of propaganda used by, for instance, abortion, right? Back then, a while ago, it was banned. So any pro-choice movies or books were banned, things like that. So to say America has the most freedom of speech is dishonest and patriotic, which is being patriotic is usually as a result to justify racism or sexism.
I'm not even going to go into that statement.
Okay.
But so let me ask you a question. After naming all those countries, then why have you not decided to move to those countries?
Well, first of all, I'm a kid. I can't really, fly. I guess, if the potential theory...
Do you plan on moving when you are...
Honestly, after I am 18, I'm probably going to get an education here. Hopefully we are more... hopefully, since I'm well off, I'm privileged, I'm white, I'm male, I'm well off, so I'm privileged, I'm probably going to get a good education. And then, honestly, I'm going to move to some of those countries. First, I was thinking the UK, just because they have, good healthcare, they have good... standards of living, way better than the U.S. The wealth inequality is way lower there. Finland, I think that would be good. A place I would like to move to is maybe Estonia, just because, as of all, they have the highest overall numbers. The standard of living there isn't that... the standard of living is good, yet the cost for living is actually pretty great. So, yeah, I think the idea that America is some great country, in terms of statistics, is a lie, and in terms of how you actually feel about it, maybe just because you were born there, maybe justifies it, but... in all, statistically, we're like 37 in healthcare. We're like 5th in suicide rates. We're number 1 in cancer, but that would be cherry picking if I were to just say that. Our healthcare system overall is number 37 in the world. And also in terms of homicides, we are way more likely. In terms of police brutality, we are number 1 in the world. So that is something we do excel at. We do excel at killing African Americans at a disproportionate rate from our police force. So that is something America does wonderfully.
You also have to take into consideration we're the 3rd largest country in the world. So, of course, our numbers are going to be higher.
Well, our numbers... Well, that doesn't really make sense because you would see then China and Russia and also other big countries. I mean, are you comparing it from land size or GDP size? Because I could give you a lot of other countries that have not the same GDP, but at least close in certain populational aspects. I could give you some in certain situational aspects that would be close to America, but are doing way better.
I'm just telling you that we are the third largest country in the world, and so of course our numbers are going to be higher. Like the coronavirus cases.
Oh, this is per capita,
They
by the way, that I'm talking. Like, I'm not going to say that America has the most deaths because per capita, Italy and China have the most deaths. However, everything I'm mentioning is per capita. How many people we save from our healthcare per capita? 40,000 people have died from a lack of healthcare since 2011, right? And so when we're looking at per capita wise, so you can definitely mention population. However, I'm talking about per capita, meaning population is practically irrelevant. If I said per 1,000 people and there were 30,000 people, and if I said per 1,000 people and there were 1 million people, the results would be the same, right? Because it's per 1,000 people. And so then when we're looking at how many people we save from our healthcare system per capita, it's way lower than a country with Medicare for all or something like that, or a single payer system like Canada, than here. So it'd be a little dishonest to say America's the best. But I will ask you this. We have like 5 minutes left, so you can give a point and I can give a point. What do you think is great about America that you can statistically prove that we do the best? You can say America's the greatest in freedom of speech. However, other countries do it better. You can say it's good in healthcare. I don't want to misrepresent you, so I'm just saying this for myself. But then other countries have a higher, standard of healthcare. You can say we have a good standard of living or a good economy. But the truth is that China is actually, if we look at pure numbers, China has a higher actual rate of growth, and the wealth inequality has been rising. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer.
Well, everything I would say you would probably try and debunk.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, I would very much so say that we have the most abilities. And if you don't mind, let me get a long speech out, and then I'll let you do all yours, and then we'll end it. But
Sure, no problem.
in America, we have more abilities to do anything in this country than any other country in the world. We are only in America can you start from nothing and make yourself into a multimillionaire. Only in America can you have the amount of freedom of speech in which we have. We have some of the best healthcare professionals in the world. We accept more immigrants in this country than in any other country. More immigrants are fleeing their countries and coming here because they know this is the land of opportunity. The things you have said tonight, it's your opinion, but it's just completely trying to make America sound like this terrible country. And only in this country can you say those things and get away with it. So I truly believe America is the best country in the world, and I just wish people saw that. So I guess now you can talk.
All right. So addressing your last point, how you said, or actually, no, I'll kind of, your main thing was opportunity, sort of the idea that America gives a lot of people opportunities, gives them a lot of chances, right? So I would say this would be true for someone like you and me, a white straight male. However, I would disagree that it would happen for African Americans or maybe white women. 1 second. I'll get to you. Maybe we can go to like 25 minutes if we need more time, things like that, right? And so basically, here's what I would say to the opportunity part. I definitely don't disagree that America gives people opportunities, but I don't think it gives them opportunities based on fairness. I believe it gives them opportunities based on a multitude of things. Past wealth. Second, I believe past or historical changes to your culture that were forced upon you by an oppressive power, right? We agree it was oppressive back in like the 1800s or 1700s when, slavery was legal, right? And so when we are talking about opportunities, the opportunities exist. However, the way people grasp them is really, really hard, which is why there are, for instance, African Americans have 10 times 10 times less the actual median income than white people do. So now moving on to your freedom of speech and how it can I kind of already debunked this talking about all the other countries. For instance, we could talk about Finland, right? You're allowed to basically say anything you'd like. There are no banned books, no banned movies, no banned anything. However, when we look in America, you could look up banned books or banned movies in America and find a long list. If you're asking me, I would say freedom of speech includes movies and books. Would you say so? I mean, book is basically an extension or a recording of your speech. Would you not say that, books and movies are basically, a result of freedom of speech? Because if you're banning movies, essentially, or banning books, that kind of ruins the whole "we are free" narrative, because if the government is controlling. Okay, actually, wait, hold on. So I went to books and stuff, but let's talk about this. So we're talking about freedom in America. If America was actually free, the government wouldn't have the right to tyrannize against you, essentially. So basically, let me give you some examples. Martial law. If the president declares martial law, he can practically evade things like the Geneva Convention. He can evade things like actual laws, right? He can send the military to do anything. He can violate the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth, the Sixth, the Seventh, the Eighth, the First, the Second, the Third, right? He can basically do anything. That would be an example of where we are actually not free. Because what you call rights, I call privileges. The government is allowing us to have this, right? The government could go in and stop us right now. So when you say they're right, we understand, right, that rights are freedoms. However, they aren't rights. They are privileges. And so when the government is giving you privileges, that's not freedom.
I can see where you're coming from, but America is giving us these rights, which they could at any point take away, but they aren't.
Well, actually, they are.
Because we're founded off the Constitution.
Didn't the government just tell us all we couldn't go outside for a while and we had to self-quarantine? That's a violation of our First Amendment.
Yes, and then you had people in Michigan, Pennsylvania, California, and all over the country protesting against it.
Yeah, and a lot of actually, this is an interesting study. So let me give you this. So a lot of people.
15 seconds.
All right, I can show you. Okay, I'll just end with this. A multitude of people have been injured by police from the riots, even for doing nothing wrong. You can search up a multitude of videos where they do something wrong. Also, my @ is Mark Politics on TikTok and YouTube. All right, there we go.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
You too. See ya. Oh man, that was good.